wish more American people would take the time to, you know, feel this guy, because he's speaking for way too many other people. And he said he was inspired first to go in and try and get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Then he got fired up even more when the Saudi army fired on fellow Muslims during the pilgrimage to Mecca. Then what really sent him over the edge to dedicate his life to killing people on the scale he does today was the Saudi royal family letting the infidel Americans use their land to do all the bombing strikes against Iraq and then leave a base there after the war. He said that, you know, Israel didn't upset him nearly as much as the House of Saud, the Saudi royal family. He went on to claim that none of those royal families in that area are native to that area, that they were installed by the British after World War I to make sure that the oil would keep flowing westward. A little digging on this seems to contradict his theories. Some of those dynasties go back 100, 200 years or more, although the British did prop them back up after World War I to make sure they had people they could use, at least in the short run. And of course, the rank and file people in those countries don't have a single good thing to say about the king and would like to overthrow them, even if it takes a Taliban-type movement to do it. So, also interesting about Osama bin Laden, I mean, obviously, he, you know, assuming he exists is a terrifying thing, but he didn't come across in this interview like some frothing maniac out to wage war on God, Mom, and apple pie. But it was also, terrorism has been privatized too. He never was a head of state or anything. He started out as a businessman, just like Yasser Arafat did. And then he got into this line of work with a huge inheritance to back him in this case. And, you know, he did a lot of construction in Sudan for the people there, so he's seen as this generous person there. Although another thing that I read recently was he actually thought he was going to get paid, and then the government never paid him and threw him out of the country and lost a bunch of money. But he seems to have a lot of it left. And others who've analyzed his group say he's not really, you know, all-encompassing dictator, military tactician, etc. He farms it out like the CEO of a large company. Others have compared him to the owner of a sports team, where there's many, many more very active people who run the thing. And even he says, you get rid of him, 100 more are going to grow in his place. And that's exactly what I'm afraid of with the great Cornholio in charge. And obviously, I worry about what more is going to happen to people of Arab descent in the United States and in other parts of the world. We've already had a fair amount of violence and some arson against mosques, and one guy who opened his gas station in Arizona for the first day of business had a turban on and a pickup truck drove by and blew him away. I fear more of that before we're done. When Reagan bombed Gaddafi that time, Frank Zappa told me that he saw a story on CNN where they were talking about camps they were building in the South to put all the Arab Americans when we went to war on Libya. And they even had an interview with one of the Chamber of Commerce people, the business head, saying, oh, this is going to be great for our economy to have this down here. And then the next day, that story was completely off the news again. So who knows what they really have in mind. And I also worry about the soldiers themselves. Like neglecting Afghanistan and the whole Soviet Empire after we fucked them up in a Cold War or a hot war, just forgetting about them, we do it to our own soldiers too. There are so many people on the streets of the bigger cities now holding up signs saying, homeless Vietnam vet will work for food. And you probably heard of Gulf War syndrome, which our government won't admit actually exists. where many of the people who came home from that war have never been quite right in the head since, or constant double vision, splitting headaches, deformed children, too spazzed out to work. Depends on the person, but there may be several different Gulf War syndromes, because some people suspect the experimental vaccine we shot all the soldiers up with to protect them from Saddam Hussein's anthrax bombs he supposedly had. And another theory is maybe he had something else that we didn't know about, and that's what did it. Another theory that interests me was that some of this is caused by depleted uranium. We have these shells coated with depleted uranium, which I guess you rescue from nuke plants or something and use it to make an extra hard coating on a shell. So these depleted uranium shells could go right through the armor of the tank and then blow it up from the inside. But what do you get afterwards? Radiation poisoning, and we use that in Kosovo too. A relative of mine went over to the Gulf War as a medic, and since he's come back, he's never been able to hold a job. He's been violent on his family. He and the family live in the back of a church now, and he sweeps up from time to time, but that's as far as it goes. And according to my family, what happened, one of the things that really sent him over the edge was after all the explosions and oil well fires and everything else, over the dunes, over the horizon, came all these crying Iraqi children wondering what happened to their families. And that was what sent him over the edge, supposedly. So, in the current patriotism uber alles atmosphere, it's not going to be quite as easy to hit the streets and oppose this war as it was the Gulf War, especially if they keep calling it a stealth war on terrorism and it never really gets going. Although I don't think the flag-waving, flag-suckling American people will stand for a war without a fair number of explosions and at least some guy with a long beard and a turban's head on a plate for Bush to show on TV, or Jerry Springer to show on TV, who knows. But there are things we can do, assuming there probably is going to be some kind of war. We probably can't stop the war, but I think it would be worth working towards shortening the war. You know, slowly as it sinks in that being patriotic and sympathizing with the people grieving in New York is not the same as blindly following George Bush. And pressure to shorten the war, I think, succeeded in the case of the Gulf War. I wish it hadn't happened at all, but after King George I started bombing Iraq, people were in the streets like mad, not just in my country, but in yours, if I recall, and Europe and Syria, Egypt, Algeria, Australia, many more badass anti-Gulf War protests. In America, they got as big in about 3 weeks as the Vietnam protests did after the first 8 years or so. And even though the corporate media wouldn't admit that was actually going on, they would do things like say, oh, the largest demonstration in San Francisco since the Vietnam War. And what do they say on the evening news? Oh, looks like those queers are acting up in San Francisco again. But out at this shopping mall in suburban Concord, here's 50 people waving conveniently provided plastic American flags. See, America supports the war. And everywhere there was a slogan, support our troops, support our troops. And we who were in the streets thought, hey, wait a minute, we're supporting our troops by saying bring them home. But no, support our troops. And the way you show you support our troops is to tie a yellow ribbon around the antenna of your car. Maybe wear another yellow ribbon. Maybe another one around the old oak tree. To the point where in some places, if you were the only car in the parking lot at work that didn't have a yellow ribbon, your windshield got smashed. This was getting ugly. And they wouldn't even leave little kids alone, either. Operation Desert Storm bubblegum cars. The first sign that something is amiss is you open it up and there's no gum inside. And instead of the usual sports heroes of football stars, baseball stars, whatever, children are supposed to look up to sports heroes like Admiral Frank Kelso, whose come hither blue eyes are inhumanly swimming pool-like. And sure enough, he was kicked out of the Navy in this tail-hook sexual harassment scandal a couple years later. There's General Norman Schwarzkopf, who wanted to go in and finish the job after we drove Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait and we're at the border of Kuwait and Iraq. Schwarzkopf was just waiting for the go-ahead to go in and burn Baghdad to the ground and kill every living thing in it until he could find Saddam Hussein. Bush, of all people, ordered him to stop. War was over, it's time to come home now. And I think the reason for that was the protests had gotten so heated so fast, and Bush had promised the other people who were allies in that war, Thatcher, who Saddam Hussein then said was vomiting poison like a spotted serpent. I love Islamic dictator quotes, or at least the ones attributed to them in the Western press. Besides, it's the best description of Thatcher I've ever heard. But he had Thatcher and Gorbachev and Helmut Kohl and the rest of them agreeing to only go as far as the Kuwait-Iraq border. I'm sure Thatcher would have looked the other way if Schwarzkopf wanted to go kill a few 100,000 people, and maybe Kohl would have looked the other way and some of the others. But by that time, there was so much heat in all the other countries from the protests that even Thatcher and crew knew that their people weren't going to stand for letting Bush go back on his word. And so, enough legs of the table come off and the alliance collapses. Bush #1 knew that, and I think since it's the same crew surrounding Bush #2, they know that too. So even though you can't go after Bush directly, you can sure as hell go after Blair to get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible. And we're going, well, they did not live up to their 2-day ultimatum. Oh, some more of these cards here. What else have we got? The Missile Control Center. Look at those big screens, kids. Just like that fun video game. Bang, 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 bang. Just like you saw on CNN. You thought Doom and Quake were violent games. What about the coverage of the Gulf War? See, kids, you could join the army and be all you can be, as the slogan says, and kill thousands of Iraqi children. Here's one they call the state-of-the-art stealth fighter bomber. We intend to use these in Afghanistan too, and I have a feeling the Taliban are going to have, they might even crack a smile and laugh over this one. These cost $2 billion a piece to make, yet you get a drop of rain on it and it's not invisible anymore. And the second day of NATO going into Kosovo, Milosevic's men somehow saw one and shot it down. How are you going to take this into a Himalayan winter unless the whole purpose is to crash them so you have to order more of them? I don't know. Here's the Top Gun card, of course. And here they are lining up the tanks with one tank in the picture whose barrel is sticking out at the exact same angle that Tipper Gore and Mary Whitehouse would object to. And if that's not enough, for those see this, look at the Tomahawk missile in flight. Purchased in Amsterdam, or maybe the Regerbahn or something. Looks an awful lot like a flying vibrator, complete with a knob on the end. A shiny red one across those pubic hair brown mountains. And this one's a sticker coming with instructions. Peel carefully, display proudly. No, not another Misfit skull for skateboard or jacket. This is the 6th Field Artillery logo. You're supposed to put that on whatever you put stickers on instead. Rival company put out the Desert Storm Pro set, and under intelligence file they list Christianity. Yeah. And there have been some comic moments in the new war on terrorism too, thankfully. There's a company called Clear Channel Communications, based in Texas, run by another one of Bush's best buddies, and they own more radio stations than any other company in the world, most of them in America. It used to be that one entity could only own one radio station in the same city. Clinton got rid of that one with the help of the Newsies too, so now Mickey Mouse is buying them up, Clear Channel buys them up, local programming, soul, jazz, funk, hip-hop, out. And they pipe in the Backstreet Boys from Atlanta by computer instead. But anyway, they're going to readjust those computers because Clear Channel on all those radio stations has banned over 150 songs because they might be unpleasant in light of the World Trade Center bombings. So on Clear Channel stations, you were no longer allowed to hear Obla Di Obla Da by the Beatles. You were no longer allowed to hear Shelley Fabre's Johnny Angel, which is not so bad, because that may be the worst song I've ever heard in my life. 3 Elton John songs are banned. Maybe this isn't so bad. I mean, for one, I heard one Elton John song, and I never wanted to hear anything of him again. But now, no more Benny and the Jets, no more Daniel, and no more Rocket Man. What else is not allowed? On Broadway by the Drifters is banned. What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong is banned. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try and love one another right now. Banned! Like a bridge over troubled water. Not anymore. Banned. What else? Oh, Cat Stevens is banned. Both Peace Train and Morning is Broken have been banned by Clear Channel. Although he'd sure be an interesting person to ask about recent events, wouldn't he? For those of you who don't know, he now goes by the name Yusuf Islam and is a fundamentalist Muslim. And when he was asked about the death warrant that Ayatollah Khomeini put on Salman Rushdie, his answer was, well, I'll put it to one of his tunes. If someone defames the prophet, he must die. Who else is banned? That'll Be the Day by Buddy Holly is banned. Imagine by John Lennon is banned. Rock the Casbah is banned. Everything by Rage Against the Machine is banned. Wipeout by the Surfaris, an instrumental, is banned. New York, New York by Frank Sinatra is banned. Finally. And Travelin' Band by the Creedence Clearwater Revival isn't allowed anymore. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. No, he's not. That's banned too. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, I think I covered most of this at this point, except for the closing statement. It would be far less costly and better for our national security to reduce our dependence on not just foreign oil, but oil altogether, as much as humanly possible. What better way to reduce our dependence on controlling the Middle East and oppressing their people in the first place? Another idea came to me that same day because, ironically, that paper, I think you even see over here some places, the USA Today, on the day of the bombings, that had a special pull-out travel section. And on the back was a big ad. I've since seen in some European magazines for the Hitachi Corporation, bragging about the semiconductors they made that helped run the Japanese bullet trains. I thought, I don't care about the semiconductors, but why not some bullet trains? Americans are so dependent on cars and especially air travel, it would be far wiser investment than putting nukes in outer space to finally build a passenger rail system that works in the United States. And, you know, granted, you can blow up bridges, you can hijack trains, but you can't fly them into buildings. Besides, trains are cool. And it also helped to offer, like we should have done in the first place, whatever money it takes to get all those impoverished former Soviet republics to sell us their leftover weapons, and we go over there and just destroy them on sight before they make their way down to the open arms flea market outside of Peshawar in Pakistan, right by the Afghan border, where, you know, it's just like a flea market. Instead of looking for clothes or old cool records or something, it's like, ooh, here's some automatic rifles. Who's got the grenade launchers? Oh, that guy? How about some Stinger missiles? The Taliban still has 200 of ours that will soon be greeting us, I'm sure. You know, it's all on the open market. We could just be buying them up and getting rid of them. Although it's going to be a little harder now than it would have been before Russia went ballistic on Chechnya, and all the people around Chechnya thought, maybe we should keep all these guns after all. For that matter, isn't it about time for a multinational effort to disarm the whole world? Pull out of this whole horse race, largely of our own making, with Britain, France, Russia, China, even Israel, and of course the United Snakes of America, all racing to see who can sell the most guns and heavy artillery to the most dictators, and then the people opposing them. For Christ's sake, and Allah's sake too, for that matter, enough is enough. Maybe our biggest foreign policy mistake in the last 15 years was to drop the ball and neglect those former communist countries after crushing them in the Cold War and helping create the situation in the first place. After World War I, we did next to nothing to help rebuild Germany, preferring instead to rub the German people's noses in their own ruins and misery. Times got so bad it took a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread, and people became so desperate that a guy like Adolf Hitler offering strong iron-fisted solutions began to look pretty good. He was democratically elected. Then look what happened. After World War II, we were a little smarter. There was the Marshall Plan to rebuild Germany and Japan so people could then enjoy the fruits of our consumer society and shop like the rest of us instead of crawling on their hands and knees for a strong dictator to pull them out of it. Why no Marshall Plan for Russia? Look what's happened, and it's not too late. Here were hundreds of millions of people fascinated with the images of our way of life, eager just to be able to buy blue jeans. Or was it the plan all along to turn the former Soviet Union into a giant Central America filled with sweatshops and cheap labor to make the blue jeans? Into that void, we allowed corruption on a scale we could scarcely imagine. Capitalism isn't working, they cry on the breadlines. Oh no, we smile. Capitalism is working. Or did we deliberately squander the so-called peace dividend after the Cold War because our own military-industrial complex wanted all those weapons, including leftover nuclear weapons, to migrate south and start leaking out and find their way into the worst possible hands, so we would have a new great Satan or Osama bin Werewolf to fight, and therefore could continue the arms race forever and ever and ever. And finally, to quote the filmmaker Michael Moore, Roger and Me, among other things, will we ever get to the point that we realize we will be more secure when the rest of the world isn't living in poverty so we can have nice running shoes? Backbreaking poverty is a prime recruiting ground for radical movements for change, and violent, strong-armed put-downs of those movements for change creates the desperation and rage that creates terrorists. After an extra night in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and 2 more stuck in Memphis, Tennessee, finally caught a flight home just in time to unpack, repack, and come over here. The security check at the Memphis airport took at least 2.5 hours. Every bag was searched, every article of clothing unfolded, Must have been even more monotonous for the security crew to have to do that all day. They were all real young guys in their very early 20s, probably just hired, paid minimum wage. They clearly didn't want to be there. A numbing assembly line factory job might actually be pleasure compared to this. I'd at least suggest rotating the airport crew members every couple hours for search duty. It increases the chance of an inside job or somebody getting bought off, but how secure are we ever really going to be anyway? I counted half a dozen places I still could have snuck something on board or into the cargo hold if I wanted to. There's always going to be a way around this. Somebody's always going to slip. Trendy platform shoes with hollowed out bottoms. A disc man that isn't really a disc man. Those rock and roll manager dude anvil briefcases with the metal framing around the sides. You could customize one of those so you could break the metal off and stick it into somebody, and we're back to square one. We will never be secure. But we could at least heed the lessons of Israel's El Al Airlines, who, according to CNN, haven't had a hijacking since the late 60s. They have trained security officers on every flight. They run all checked baggage through a decompression chamber to simulate high altitude, so if there's an altitude-triggered bomb, it goes off where nobody's going to get hurt. And they protect their pilots through not one, but two bulletproof doors, and they also reinforce the floor of the passenger cabin so something that blows down below isn't necessarily going to blow the whole plane out of the sky. In Germany, government law enforcement officers work the metal detectors and security. They are well trained and well paid. While in America, what do we do instead? Privatization. Privatization. In San Francisco, the people who x-ray and check our carry-on bags are the lowest paid people in the entire airport. And nationally, turnover among people who work those security jobs in American airports is between 120 and 150% every year. So something could stand to be improved there. If nothing else, I noticed after this happened that people in America were just being a little nicer to strangers than usual. Actually being courteous to each other and taking somebody's point of view or predicament into account besides their own. Maybe that will last. That would be nice, although with the Bush being John Wayne, I have my doubts at this point. And how did Bush get in there in the first place, anyway? I mean, you probably heard a lot about all kinds of weird shit that went on in the state of Florida in the last presidential election, which if we were allowed to directly elect our president wouldn't have mattered because Gore won by, what was it, either 500,000 or 5 million votes nationwide. I can't remember how many zeros were on the end. But because we have this system where it has to go state by state, and each state has a certain number of electoral votes, they call it, depending on the population, suddenly Florida was all important because the electoral votes, Gore was one away from having won, but Florida could put Bush ahead of him. Whoever got Florida got the election. So, typical Florida election, but this time they got caught. I have a feeling they always take the old Jewish lady ballots in Palm Beach and boot them into the canal. Other things that got uncovered were in northern Florida, in Jacksonville. They were blocking off the streets, the police were, in some black neighborhoods, and then anybody who was African American who showed up to vote was hit for 5 pieces of ID. Not that many people have that many pieces of ID on them, unless you got a lot of credit cards. And then, if you pass that, well, looks like you're on our list of convicted felons, boy. Best you go on home. But I've never been convicted of a crime in my life. I'm a minister. That's my church right down there. "You best understand your place here, boy, and get on home." The South rose again. They always said the South shall rise again. The trouble is it never really set, and there was Florida and who knows how many other places that run their elections like that. But in other ways, tactically, Gore gave the election away and gave Florida away after the shit hit the fan. For one thing, his Vice President, Joseph Lieberman, went out and agreed with Bush that we should count all the military ballots, even if they were postmarked after the election or didn't have a postmark on it at all. Oh, we can't say no to our soldiers. And Gore would not go to Jacksonville to stand with the people who weren't allowed to vote because they were black. I don't know if he didn't want to be photographed with black civil rights leaders or what, but he wouldn't go stand with them, which could have rescued him in Florida. And what really galls me about that is that starting right after the Florida thing, and this happened, even my own family was doing this when I went home for the holidays. If it weren't for Ralph Nader and your Green Party, then Gore wouldn't have lost the election. You wouldn't have all these horrible Bush people in power now. You wouldn't have somebody pulling the plug on the Kyoto Treaty against global warming and all that. Well, I beg to differ on that. I mean, my first impulse is to say, ha, 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 ha. And I can see the point when Gore was behind Bush by about 500 votes in Florida when the Supreme Court ordered they stop the recount right in the middle of it and just make Bush president. While in Florida, 97,000 people voted for Ralph Nader and the Green Party instead of Gore and Bush. But more to the point, Ralph and the Greens didn't cost Gore the election. Gore cost Gore the election. The reason we were driven into green world to begin with was not just Bush, but Gore supported so many things that I won't vote for anybody who supports the death penalty, or the drug war, or the WTO, or gutting the welfare system, creating so many new homeless people and stuff, which Gore proudly took credit for persuading Clinton to sign Newt Gingrich's welfare destruction bill on that one. Gore was also pro-Star Wars. Gore was even in favor of teaching biblical creation theory in public schools. This is supposed to be the liberal Democrat and all. And he said, oh no, it's not going to be taught in biology class. It will be taught in religion class. Trouble is, there aren't religion classes in American public schools, nor should there be. I mean, I don't think people should have, if people want to study religion, they should do it at the church of their choice, not the church of the government's choice or the school system's choice. And yes, Bush pulled the plug on the global warming treaty, which wasn't that good anyway, but would have been better than nothing. But guess who went to Kyoto to try and nuke the treaty before it ever got finished? Gore. And another thing that people don't seem to want to admit helped cost Gore that election is his wife. Remember Tipper Gore? I remember Tipper Gore very well. They're now, what is it, 15 years now, almost 16. Her anti-rock music campaign, and it's touched all of you too. Anything with an explicit lyric, parental advisory, Tipper sticker on the album, that's what Tipper has done to restrict what you're allowed to hear. Because some people say, oh, the Tipper sticker is just a marketing tool. People won't buy stuff anymore unless it's got the Tipper doesn't like it sticker on it. But a lot of the great big chain stores that have taken over more and more music retailing, at least where I come from, won't stock anything with a Tipper sticker on it. So the major labels all have in-house lyric screening committees, and they often order bands to either rewrite or completely omit songs that they are afraid might offend Tipper, and they'll need to voluntarily put the sticker on. And Tipper had much more in mind when she started the anti-music campaign, along with the organization she co-founded with another group of Washington, D.C. society ladies called the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC. Her main partner was James Baker, George Bush I, Secretary of State's wife, Susan Baker, who more importantly was on the board of directors of Focus on the Family, one of the two biggest, best financed, most powerful religious right hate groups in the United States. So from the very beginning, there was a fundamentalist